Hello, and thank you for coming along to Mike Martin's talk, which was on the 3rd of February.
I just wanted to say a little bit about the community before we move on. And the reason I set this up in September was just to bring together a range of great talkers with people who had a mutual passion and interest in photography.
And since setting this up, it's been a wonderful journey. We've now got over 400 subscribers.
I've tried to replicate what people would ordinarily receive as part of a group or as part of a club. So I've tried to organise weekly meetings which cover a range of topics and genres to suit a variety of interests.
So if you're interested in joining in, feel free to let me know or sign up to the mailing list. I don't send spam. And I've booked another 15 plus talks between now and the end of May, so lots coming up.
And I'm going to be showing you different approaches for retouching in the first half, and then some stuff on using custom brushes in the second half. But I'm going to be using CS6. It's the last version before it became the subscription model, and I've not upgraded. I haven't really seen the need to upgrade, although obviously as time goes by, the new tools and things are going on, in leaps and bounds, and making life a lot more interesting and easy, to do things. There will probably be a point in time where I'll need to upgrade just to keep up, but here I am at the moment. Right, so without further ado, shall I share my Photoshop and we can get started?
Chatting away with my microphone off. Real range of people in here tonight as well, all over the world. Thanks very much for joining us.
What I would say is, because we're doing a live demo and it is going to get a little bit technical at times, it may be worth you sort of keeping a tab on that and interrupting as we go along if anyone wants me just to recap while we're at that point in time in the process. Excuse me. So hopefully you can see an image of Hannah shrouded in sort of pink fabric and everything. This young lady came along to a photo shoot in the studio with me, and she did her own makeup, and she's done a flawless job on there, so there's really not too much that needs to be done. However, because I wanted to get her sort of laying down and surrounded by all this fabric, there are some, shall we say, some issues with the way I've posed her that present some challenges, and give us an opportunity to work on the image in post-production to actually make it a lot better. So if I start by, and I did this earlier on today, so I've already got some layers here. You can see in my stack here where I've already gone through some of the changes. So if I start by sort of demonstrating those areas that I want to work on. So first thing is the neck. She doesn't have a fat neck. You wouldn't say that of any girl, but she doesn't. But because of the angle that I'm taking the picture, it makes the neck look broader than it would otherwise do. Now, I generally speaking don't warp anybody's body or change the shape of people or the shape of their features or anything like that. But occasionally, if I've posed someone in a way that actually accentuates particular features and makes them look unrealistic and disproportionate, then you might want to correct that in post-production, because all you're doing is restoring the true image of what they look like away from how you have captured them in the camera, if you understand the difference there. So that's one area, this area here around the neck, if you can see where I'm sort of indicating. The other thing is, I've sort of, the hair on the top of the head is a little bit flattened, and again that's because she's pulled it all down behind her head, and when she's laid on her head it's pulled it tighter than it would otherwise normally be. So there's a couple of areas that I'm going to just show you how to deal with, and here's one I prepared earlier. You can see the change. So I'll take you through how to do that. Did you spot the difference? So you can see I've tucked the neck in a little bit and I've poofed out the hair. I did also curve this bit at the top here, top left. You can see that bit there is a curve. That's purely aesthetics, whether you want to do it or not. I chose to do that because it just sort of breaks up that solid line and just sort of gives it a little bit more of a wrap around. But that's purely cosmetic, so that's not really that important. What I would say to anyone, if you're ever contemplating doing any adjustments in terms of warping or changing the shape of the subject that you are portraying in your image, my suggestion would be to always make sure that you do that first. And the reason I say that is some of the other techniques involve working on multiple layers. And obviously if you're going to warp a part of an image, if you've got it already split into multiple layers, the chances of you synchronizing the same adjustment on each of those individual layers is quite hard. So if you do the warping and the shape changing at the outset before you do anything else, then from that point onwards you're working on a consistent image, if that makes sense. So let's get started. So I'll duplicate this layer because I'm going to actually walk you through it. Although I've done it here already to show you the effect, I'm going to take you through it step by step. So first thing I always do is duplicate the background layer, and I've just realised I've still got my different brush, so make sure I've got an ordinary brush. I didn't reset my brush after this morning. Right, so I've got an ordinary brush. So come up here and select the marquee tool, and I'm going to just draw around that area. And so I've got this area active in the middle, and I can come up here to edit, transform, warp. Now some people would use liquify. I prefer to use the warp for this type of thing because it will give you a smoother transition and a more subtle change than if you use the warp tool. But you can the liquify, but you can use either. So you can see now you've got a 9-box grid within that selected area, and if I pick any of those points, you can drag it around. Right, so you just pick one of the anchor points and you could just pull it in. I can't remember how much I did it by, but you don't have to go too heavy-handed, and that's fine. What I would say is, and I'll deliberately show you where it goes wrong, if you move any of these outside 9 points, you'll get all sorts of problems occur. So I'm going to deliberately mess this up so that you can see. So if I pull that down and say move that one across, and now if I hit the enter key to commit those, you can see that's made a complete pig's ear. I'll deselect that. You can see we've got a discontinuity in her neck now. You can see where that edge was, I've now sheared along it, so it's gone out like that, and it's made a complete mess. So I'll click Control Z to undo it, and the undo is only undoing the select, so so it's not undoing that effect. So I can come up here to the history and go back to the rectangular mark, and then back to my layers, and I'm okay to start again. So let's go edit, transform, warp. So the message there is always make sure that you're adjusting in the middle here rather than one of those edges, but be mindful, even if you use, see, if you click in that top line, it's moving those edges along and adjusting those, so you do need to be careful and watch what's happening around the extremities. So let's go do that again, edit, transform, warp. So as I said, I'm just going to tuck her neck in a little bit. There we are. It doesn't have to be a lot, and we'll click enter. And now if I turn that off, that's already improved the image quite significantly. If we hold, so I deselect that, Control D, get rid of the marching ants, and then hold the Shift button down and just drag with my hand to move around the image. If I want to poof the hair up a bit, draw around there, and we'll go Edit. You can see there I went to select the Edit Transform, but you can see I hadn't turned that layer back on again, so I need to make sure that layer is active. So I go Edit, Transform, Warp, and I've got the 9 boxes again, and this time I can just pull that out a little bit just to give a bit more volume in the hair, and I can bring that down. So that clicked Enter to commit that, and then Control D to deselect it. So now, having done both of those, you can see the difference. And if we zoom out, so there's the full image, and it's made quite a significant change with just those 2 little adjustments. Okay, so I'm quite happy to leave this image as that to sort of move on to the next step. So here's one that I prepared earlier. Actually, I didn't move it as much, but we'll work from that one, so I'll delete that layer. So you've now got this layer marked Body Warp, which is the one that I did earlier, and the one I've used as the base layer for all of the other adjustments. So we've sorted out the problem that I introduced because of the way I posed the model. So now we look at the makeup. Do we need to do anything with the makeup on her? And you can see the face is absolutely flawless. There's no real issue with that at all. But because we're looking at this angle and there's a large area of the neck exposed, that's looking a little bit blotchier than you would want. So first thing I'm going to show you is just simple cloning and healing, and you can see here's one I've done earlier. So what you can do without doing a lot of retouching, if you just want to deal with blemishes, spots and those sorts of things, you can just do those on separate layers using the clone or the healing tool, and I'll go through that in a moment. So this is the picture as it is after warp, and that's having done those few adjustments, and you probably didn't see what they were. If she'd got spots that you wanted to remove, then you know, I would have done so. There was a little bit of a mark just on the chin. If we zoom in, if you press Control 1, that goes into 100%. So you can see there, turn it off. She's applied makeup to conceal a spot on her chin. But if you've got things like moles and that sort of those sorts of marks, I wouldn't generally remove them, but I might want to soften them down. So always treat spots and moles on separate layers is the answer there. And what I do is I deal with each of these areas as separate bits. So let's work through an example. So take that layer I've got here, duplicate it, so I've now got a new layer that I'm going to work on, and I'm going to just change the colour of that so we can see the area that I'm working on. So that's my base layer that I'm working on, the body warp copy. So first thing I do is layer, new layer, and I'll just create an empty layer, so that's sat above everything else here. So the first thing I want to do is come up and use the healing tool. I rarely use spot healing brush. The spot healing brush and the healing brush are very similar but slightly different. Spot healing, you don't select the area that Photoshop is sampling from. So if I were to, and I'll show you on these moles here, if I were to just click on the spot healing there, boom, it's gone. But I don't get to choose where it's gone from, so let's undo that. If I used the healing brush, I get to choose now by pressing the Alt key, and I can choose where I want to sample from. So I could sample, I'm only sampling this piece here to show you. You could sample from there and then paint over there. And here you'll notice nothing happened. The reason nothing happened is at the top here, right at the top, you can see it says which layer to sample. Now I'm working on an empty layer over here. You can see an empty layer, and I want to sample the current and the layer below. So put that on. Make sure that says current and below. So now when I pick my sample area, and I'll pick over there, so you can see it makes a mess. Right, I've now brought the texture from the fabric over that. So you can see I've chosen where to do it. I've chosen very badly in this example, so I'll undo that. What I would do is pick somewhere which has got a tone similar to that I'm looking for. So pick somewhere there, and when I decide where I want to pick, I just press the Alt key and click, and then do that. Now I said I wouldn't normally remove those types of marks because people are what they are, but you might want to soften them. So having just taken those out, I can now come back to my layer here. You can see and I turn it off, they're back again, turn it on, they're there. But if I reduce the opacity, I've softened them, so I'm now they're only half as prominent as they were before. And you can do that with things like birthmarks as well, if you want to reduce the visual impact of them, but nevertheless still show them, because, you know, again, a birthmark is part of who that person really is. So if you do these on separate layers, and I can put that there and say that's moles. So I now know that I've done that adjustment on that layer. If I come up here and go layer, new layer, I can now come and do the spot if I want to. So again, click. So I keep, when I'm doing this, I keep a finger on almost on the Alt key, and I'll press down, click, and do that. You might want to get rid of some of these specular pieces, and it's just click to sample, click on, click off, and you just work your way around, and you can do that sort of thing. So there, I've got rid of it completely. So I might want to do that 100%. Now she hasn't got any other sort of marks there at all, so there's nothing really that I would want. I could say, well, okay, get rid of those couple of little marks.
Right, can I just throw a question in here?
Yeah.
A question about if you're going for qualification. If you're entering a portrait, would judges prefer these natural freckles removed, or how would you?
Certainly, with freckles, I'd keep those, and with the moles, I'd keep them. But you know, blemishes like that on the chin, you know, she's already put a lot of effort in concealing that with the makeup that she's put on, and she's minimised that. I have no qualms about taking that one out. But as I say, with the moles, yeah, normally I wouldn't do it, but I just did it to show you that you can actually soften them if you want to. But normally I wouldn't do that. Okay, so I'll leave that turned off, and we've got just this layer here. So that's the chin. So then I can come up and layer, new layer, and I can put neck. If I can hit the right key when I'm typing. So now come over to the neck area, and you can see there's some crease lines. Now, again, it's a matter of choice whether you get rid of those, but if I click here and then do that, you can soften those. And you can remove, you know, soften some of those adjustments, and you just work your way round if that's what you want to do. And it is up to you to choose how much you're happy doing. You know, there's a bit of a sort of crease line there, and you can work your way round. And if you wanted to even out some of these tones here, like you've got a darker bit next to a lighter bit, you could, you know, do that and use the healing brush to sort of soften those tones if that's what you wanted to do. So I'm not going to go over the whole thing now, but you can see there's a light patch there, and you can take it as far as you want in terms of evening out the tone, but what you're copying is the detail from one area and cloning it over another area, and it's sort of getting rid of it by adopting the same tone as the area that you're using as the source. So if we click that on and off, you can see that's made quite a difference already. Now if we zoom out, it's less obvious when you come out, but nevertheless you can still see where I've made those changes. And if that's all you want to do is just deal with a few localized bits of adjustments, then the quickest way of doing it is by using the healing brush on a separate layer. And if you wanted to soften those adjustments without removing them completely, oops, went the wrong way, rather than removing them completely, so there they are, that's having removed them. Again, I can come up here and I can pick my opacity slider and reduce it. Okay.
Mike, if I could just pop a question in. Caroline's asked a question about how does doing that, going through that process, differ from just using the clone tool?
Sorry, how is it different from the clone tool?
Yeah, how does that differ from the clone tool? Yeah.
I'll show you. So we'll turn that one off. Layer, new layer. There are times when you would want to use one and not the other. So let's find somewhere. Say I wanted to remove this. You can see because of the angle, the back of her earring has dropped down. Okay, so that's a little bit of a distraction. So hold the shift and drag that into the middle. So say I wanted to remove the earring, or the back of the earring, because it's a bit of a distraction. If I try using the healing brush and I say, well, I want to take a bit of the neck, so I click Alt, hold the Alt, click there, and then release that and do that. You can see that's working okay, but as soon as I get to the edge, we've got the colour, the white, bleeding into this area. The healing brush is fine if you're picking from an area that you want to sample and placing it in another area. But if you've got a solid line as an edge to it, then you get this sort of weird thing going on the edges, which is, you know, where the light bleeds into it, because it's sampling part of that and part of here and part of there and putting it all together to try to fit it. And what we've got is a lighter piece where the white has bled into it and made a bit of a pig's ear of it. It's messed it up. Okay, so if you're working near boundaries, edges of something, so say I wanted to get rid of that hair. There's a hair that's just cropping that shadow area in the ear. And again, I wouldn't do this, but say we wanted to remove that, so I've clicked Alt and picked there. It hasn't done too bad a job, but if I were to sample from there and try to do it, you can see it, the light colour on this side has bled into it because I was picking an area of uniform. So as long as you sample on the border and then click on the border, it's fine. But if you sample away from the edge and then try to click on close to an edge, you get that colour bleed. So there are limitations as to when you can and can't use that healing brush. So let's delete that. Now I'll show you if you use the clone tool. So layer, new layer, and we've still got current and below. So now if I come up and use the clone, and I've got it at 100% opacity at the top and flow 100%. I rarely change those. But what I can do is I can pick this area and I can go like that. and I can go quite close to the edge. And what you should do is you could sample and click, same as I did before, press the Alt to sample and then release and then paste where you want it to go. But you can see there's a little bit of repetition creeping in, and what I can do then is come this way to sort of do that, and if it's too solid I can always reduce the opacity to blend those sorts of areas together, so you can soften the effect and have it sort of bleed over. And you know, if you're still not happy with that, having got rid of the earring, the hard bit, you can always come back and use the healing brush and say, well, okay, now I'm going to use that there to smooth those out, because the healing brush tends to smooth out sampled areas more than the clone does. But you can see there it's given a little bit of an edge because I'm going from a dark area to a light area. So you can soften the effect by doing that, as long as you don't get too close to the edge like I did there. It's pulled some of the black off the hair onto the neck. So it's horses for courses, but if we zoom out, I haven't done it particularly well. There should still be a bit more shadow, but you can see there an example of, you know, how you could remove that if you wanted to. So that's essentially the difference between the healing. I would tend to use the healing brush if I can, and then resort to the clone if I have to, is the answer, simple answer there. So that effectively is how you can sort of retouch using the healing brush, the spot healing brush, and the clone brush. Okay, so let's get rid of all of those. Any questions on those, Mark, or generally speaking, people happy with that?
Yeah, I think no questions on those. Caroline just sort of wanted a bit of clarification. So the healing brush is more content aware than obviously the clone, isn't it?
Yes.
The clone just pulls directly. Yeah.
Content. So the clone tool will actually copy what is there, and it might feather the edges depending on the brush selection you've got. Whereas the healing brush is more content aware, so it will look at the surrounding pixels and try to blend it all together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to go through that as well.
Okay, so let's get rid of that one. So we've still got our body warp copy there. So the next example I was going to show, I've shown you the simple cloning and healing, so let's get rid of that. So we'll go on to frequency separation, and things step up a level now. So that's having done it. That's what I'm going to achieve. So if you see the neck, see how that's evened out all of those blotchiness in the tones on the neck. That's what I'm going to try to achieve. Okay, so let's turn that off. So we'll start with our body warped copy, duplicate it, and we'll label that. I'll blur, or I'll call it tone, because this is the color layer. So tone. I rarely actually label them myself. I'm usually too lazy, but it's good practice to label the layers so you know what's what. So you come up here, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I always pick 15. Don't ask me why. It works. As simple as that. 15 pixels. And you can see we've now got a fuzzy image. And effectively what we're using this layer to do is to convey the colour information that's in the picture. So you can see the lips are this darker red and the cheeks are redder. There's a light highlight on the chin, and then there's sort of the peachier pink of the skin there, and you've got the colour of the eye makeup and so on. but you can still see there is some variation in colour on the neck. We'll deal with that in a minute. But effectively what it's done is it's split the picture. It's because I've blurred it, it's got rid of all the detail, and it's just now focusing on the range of colours and the distribution of colour in the image. Okay, so we go back to our body warp, so we leave that tone layer, we go back to our body warp copy and produce another layer. Drag that to the top so it's now above the tone, and we'll call that one detail. Okay, so we now want, and you can see because we've put a complete copy on top of it, that's now obscuring all of the blurring that we just did a moment ago. So this is where the magic occurs, or the alchemy, it's probably closer to it. So you come up to image, apply image, and we get this pop-up. And it's telling me the source is this file. It's always the same file as you're in. Sometimes if it comes up with layer merged, you'll get something that's completely grey like that, and that's of no use to you at all. So if that happens, you might need to change it. But what you do is you click on the down arrow, and you've given all of the layers in that stack. Now that's the one that I've just created, the one that just says tone. So you pick that, you make sure it's on RGB, and you put your blending mode on subtract. That's normal. I don't know what these ones would do. If you're interested in the effect of these ones in this process, then go away and play with it. But the important thing here is to do the frequency separation. You put that on subtract, and make sure that opacity is 100%, offset's 128, and scale is 2. Don't ask me why, it just works. So you will need to know those things. So Mark, I might give you a cheat sheet which has got some of these that you can circulate to people afterwards, so they've got the figures, because they are the figures. You just have to learn that those are the numbers that you need.
Yeah, I think also on the video when I send it out, I'll put it onto YouTube, and I'll actually bookmark this point so that people can jump to it quickly as well, Mike.
Okay, so click OK. Now what that's done is it's compared the detail layer, which was, if you remember, was derived from the full image, so this body warp copy. So it's looking at that level of information, so it's the colour and the detail, and then saying how does each pixel value differ from the layer that we asked it to compare, which was the tone layer. So all that is showing now is the bits where they don't agree. So in uniform pieces where the skin was on the blurred skin is the same as on the full image, where there was no sort of detail, it'll go completely grey. But where there was some difference, that difference is now showing. So this is only showing the texture. So if we zoom in, you can see the texture is still here on the skin. We've got all the texture and all the detail, but it's lacking the colour. Okay, so now what we can do is we can work separately on the tone, because it's on one layer, and we can work on the detail on another, and you can do those on separate layers. So if we go to this spot that was on the chin there, and if I go Control 1, that goes back to 100%. So what we can do here is we can now use the healing brush. Okay, so I'll select that. Now, deliberate error. If you can see here, it still says current and below. If I sample here or here by pressing the Alt button to sample from there and then paint here, it should have made a mistake. It should have gone wrong, because you would normally. Sorry, it's leveled it out because it's picked both. that wasn't a good example. Normally you would pick current layer, and the reason you'd do that, let's find another area to do. So if I was so just reducing, let's do the nose for example. If I click here and just go onto that, you can get rid of some of those marks on the nose. But if I click there and go over this area, what I'm doing is I'm putting texture into that area where there wasn't any texture, and you don't really want to do that. If you've got an image where you've blown out some detail, you might want to do that, because what you do, if you've got an area which has got this similar tone to that the area should have had that you've blown out, you can actually copy the detail across from somewhere else and recover the detail, or repaint the detail back into the areas you'd lost it. But you wouldn't normally do that, because you wouldn't do it without softening it, because there wouldn't be as much texture in that highlighted area. So let's undo that, and if we do it now, and sometimes I'll do this on another layer above that separately, so you can control it, but you could pick a different area and just do it a little bit softer. So not quite so much text coming in, but what I'm doing is I am bringing texture from a different area into it. Now, if you want to see what you've done there, this grey layer you've got to convert, and you need to add the detail from the detail layer to the colour on the tone layer, so that it restores, having separated them out, the two elements out, you want to now put the two together and restore that. So the way to do it is to use the blend modes. And again, don't ask me why, but the one you need to select is linear light. And the linear light is the reciprocal of the subtract mathematically. So whereas before we worked out the difference, this is now adding the two together. So if we come out, you can see there that's overdone it a little bit in terms of the effect. It looks a little bit unnatural. But I did that just to show you. I wouldn't do that on the original, and you can see I didn't do that on the original when I did it earlier on today. So let's ignore that bit that I've just deliberately done wrong, but just to show you how it works. Now, what you might want to do is, and you can work with this detail layer, which is all grey just with the detail. You can work with it in linear light mode, and then just do all your retouching on that level as it is. So again, coming back to these moles, if as an example, we could click Alt and just get rid of them. I'll undo it again, but you could do that in this view. But some people find it easier, and it's certainly the recommended way is to turn that layer to normal while you're editing, and then you don't get distracted by the colour differences and you only look at the details. So now we can say, okay, here we've got a couple of little marks I might want to just remove, and I might want to get rid of that crease in the neck a little bit, soften that, and that one there. And if you've got patches of rough skin that you want to soften, you can do this and go round. Okay, so you can use that by clicking with the Alt and sampling, and then and little X is showing you where you're sampling from when you're painting, and you could sort of do that and work your way around the image as you would ordinarily, but you're just healing on that that layer. That's a long-winded way of doing it, but you can do it. Now let's turn that off. If we come back to this here, you can see there's still a little bit of blotchiness in the skin. Now it's probably best to have this layer turned on and in the blended mode, linear light, so you can see the overall effect. I'll zoom out a little bit. Okay, so how do we deal with this? So we go onto the tone layer, which is underneath, which has just got the colour. We pick the lasso tool. Now I always use 15 to 25, so let's pick 20 as my feather on that. And then you just draw around the area that you want to soften. So I've now got an active selection there. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I will go, you can do it at 15, but I wouldn't, sometimes I'll take it up to 25 at the most. I wouldn't go beyond 25, but you know, you can, I'm going to just type 25 in and then click OK. There we are. And you can see what it's done is it's taken the light tone, the bits where it was light, and bled those into the bits which were darker, and the darker bits into the light bit, and it's evened those out. And you can do it multiple times. So, you know, that crease there I might want to do. And you can go filter, and you've already got it here. You can just click on that and it'll do it again. And you can do it multiple times if you want to. And pick different areas. And what it's doing is it's evening out those tones. So say I wanted to soften the jawline, there's absolutely no reason why I would want to soften the jawline, but say I wanted to soften her jaw because there was a really deep shadow, there isn't, you could use that and go like that, and you can see it's softened that line. I'm going to undo that because there's no reason I would want to do it really, but I'll just show you that as an example. So having done that a couple of times, you can see it's evened out the hot spots that you had in the tone of the colour. It's effectively flattening it, and that's the thing you need to be careful of, because if we zoom out, so you can see, deselect the marching ants, and I'm just going to group those two layers together so I can toggle them off and on. So that was without, and that's the adjustment I've just done. It's quite a significant difference with not a lot of effort really, just on those two layers, but it does make the face look a little bit flatter than it would have otherwise been, or the neck a little bit flatter. So you might want to then do some dodging and burning to add some shape back again. Or now you've got it in a group, and you've still got a original layer underneath it, you can always reduce the opacity to soften that effect. And that's one of the easiest ways of making sure it looks realistic, is by just softening it. Now, the other thing I will show you there is a cheat really. Say you've got something that you want to increase the contrast of in this image, doing the opposite of softening, or you want to go soft focus. If you want to go soft focus, you could just turn off the detail layer, or you can reduce the opacity of the detail layer, and that will give you a general softening. It's a general removal of some of the detail. Okay. If you want to increase the detail somewhere, just duplicate that layer, and then you can see, if I wanted to make more of the fabric, I've now got double sharpening on that. So you can use it to sharpen, but you wouldn't want it on the face. You might want it, say, on eyelashes and things like that. But so what I would normally do is fill a layer mask on there, come over here, make sure you've got black selected, fill that with black, and then you can paint. If you press X, it'll swap the swatch to white, and you can pick up a brush, as you do ordinarily on a normal layer, and you can paint in with white where you want to do. Say I wanted to do that just to make the eyelashes a little bit sharper and the iris of the eyes. You can do that. You're increasing the apparent contrast there, or the detail. You might want to just it works a treat on an image that isn't quite as sharp as it should be, perhaps because you've used a higher ISO, so you get a softer image to start with. It's not recommended to recover a picture that way, but it sometimes makes a difference between chucking it in the reject bin and keeping it. So you can, you can see there, just turn that second layer off, back on. It's just sharpening those eyes a little bit. It is a bit of a cheat, but if you wanted to apply that to the fabric, you can get a brush here, make it a bigger brush, and just paint it in. And it will sharpen up that fabric. You wouldn't want to really. If anything, I would probably want to make that softer. But as I say, you could do it that way. If I wanted to make that fabric softer, all I do is put on the detail layer, put a layer mask. So, and then I can paint with a black brush. These areas, and I can make that softer and less sharp. So it's almost like I'm using a soft focus lens in those areas that I want, and you just paint around, and you can see it's darkening up on there. If I really want to go to town, I could make it completely soft. So it's your choice how much you want to do, and then just leave the face sharp. So effectively simulate having a shallower depth of focus than you would otherwise. And again, with such a fantastic face, I could do that on the whole of the neck and that. So we're removing some of that detail by just painting out on using a mask to obscure some of that information. Okay, so there. So having got those two, so that's on, that's off. Everyone happy with that? That's frequency separation. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to ask an obvious question because I don't do this, Mike. I mean, how do you get to know quickly what is too much? Is it when it starts to look a bit plasticky and things like that?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you've got to have some texture in the face. Otherwise it just doesn't look real. And let's take that to complete extremes. So we come in here. If I take this layer off, that's gone too far. You can see there's no detail. Now some people will produce an image, and let's get rid of that mask. Delete the mask. Put a new mask on, and having turned that layer off, I'll turn it back on again, fill it with black, so now none of that detail is revealed. Now I'll pick up a white brush, make it a little bit smaller. So obviously her earring's going to be sharp, so I'll do that to reveal the detail on the earring. I think I've changed my brush there somehow. I've picked up a strange brush there. Let's do that again. Well, I can just paint in black to get rid of that. If you make a mistake on a mask, you can just change it to the opposite colour and paint it back in again. So there we are, painting all of that back in again. Let's go over to the eye. So I've got the detail active but all hidden. I'm on the mask, pick up a brush, make sure that I've got a soft brush, and make sure I've picked it as white. So I can paint that back in. I'm not sure why I'm picking up strange scribbles there. I've obviously, I know why. I've got a secondary brush set. I was playing with brushes earlier on today. Right, having fixed that, so that I can just paint. There we are, that's better, that's what I was expecting. So I can go round and I can paint. Right, I'm going to paint the eyes. So I'm painting white here to reveal the eyes. I'll do the eyebrows, because we'll have them. I'll do the earring, and I might want to do the mouth. And some people literally do retouching that looks as bad as that. They've plasticated everything except for a few, key parts of the face. Now, what you could do to soften that, because that is an extreme case where I'm keeping none of the detail on the face, I could just click on the detail layer there, double click on that to bring up the layer properties, and if I reduce the density down, I'm now getting some of the texture coming through, but all of the detail on the eyes. So it's softened half of the skin, because it's only showing half the detail, but it's showing all of the detail around the eyes where I did it. So that's another quick cheat that you can use to control how much that you've got. And because I didn't paint particularly carefully, I can feather the edge as well, so that it blends those two together. So does that answer that one, Mark?
Yeah, it's always sort of, there's so many ways around this, aren't there? So many ways.
There are.
Yeah.
And you have to choose how far to go, everything is subjective, but if you think you might have gone too far, you have. That's the simple answer.
Everything else, yeah.
If you ask the question, you've overdone it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, so let's get rid of frequency separation, because we've done that. We'll get rid of that group that I just did, because we've done that. So we're back to our base copy. So the next technique is something that some of the pros will spend a lot more time on, and it is a lot more time intensive. And that's using localized dodge and burn. And to do that, you basically have to set up multiple layers. So I'll show you the after effect there. And you can see it's made some changes to the neck that I've done earlier on today. And what we've got is a stack of layers. That's just another copy of our base layer. We've got another curve that is darkening parts of the skin, another one that's lightening part of it. We've got a grey layer here which is just serving as a mask, so you can see what you do. So I'll turn that on, and effectively by turning the image to a grayscale, by putting a 50% grey layer over it, you can now focus on where those bits of detail are, whether they're lighter or darker than that mid-grey tone. And just to make it easier, you can put a big S-curve over the top of the whole lot, which increases the contrast, so again you can see easier those areas that you want to focus on. So let's do that.
Mike, can I just ask a quick question here? Dave's just asked if he could ask you what layer you would copy to move on to the next process, so the process between this one and the previous one, I said.
Oh, wanted to see the difference between the two?
Which layer you would copy, I think. Or I can switch the mic on, Dave, if you'd prefer to ask that question yourself, if I'm not
Yeah.
hearing you correctly. Let me just switch your mic on, Dave. Okay, do you want to go for that question, Dave, if you can?
Hi, thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks, Mike. I was just wondering if, obviously, you've done the frequency separation process, and you're then moving on to the global dodge and burn, or the dodge and burn.
Yeah.
What layer would you copy to create that next process? Because obviously you've deleted the frequency you've deleted that frequency separation layer.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. I'm with you. And what I'll do is I'll go back to my history and
Thanks, Mark.
and reinstate that group, so that I can toggle it off and on. So that frequency separation group is all there. This group 1 is the one that I just did a moment ago, so I'll delete that. Now I'll get rid of this one here. So if you remember, so I've turned everything else off, and we're back to, there's the original background, there's the body warp, this red layer, having tucked the neck in, and that is always the start of whichever process that I looked at. So on the frequency separation, there's a copy there which is red, which was that start layer. That's exactly the same layer as this one. So let's do away with that. And on the local dodge and burn, this layer here, I should have labelled it red. That again is just another copy which is exactly the same as the one below it now. Okay, so it says start copy warp, so those are the same. So let's get rid of all of that. So we'll turn that one off, and we'll start with the body warp layer that we were, so that's just after having tucked the neck in. So we'll duplicate that layer and turn that one off so that we've got a new layer to start with. So the first thing you do is the first of the two adjustment layers. So you've got an adjustment layer above this, and you bring it down. You don't have to worry about how far, you just want it to darken the whole image. Okay, and you fill that layer with black, the mask with black. So none of that adjustment we put there is now showing. Then you would go up here and you'd put another layer, fill the mask with black. In fact, I'll disable that, and then lift that up. So this, you've got one where you've got the curve going up to lighten it, and one underneath which is darkening it. So turn that back on. So neither of those layers are having any impact on the image at the moment, because they're both completely hidden by these black masks. You then go layer, new layer, and you come over to your swatch and fill it with 50% black, 50% grey, and then change that to colour mode. Okay, so now we've got a monochrome copy of the whole image, so I'm not going to get confused by what's happening in the picture in terms of the light and the different colour tones. It's really the luminosity that I'm going to work on to reduce the to do the retouching. Okay, and as I said, to just accentuate that, you can put another guide layer over the top, click in the middle and make that into a sharp S, if you find it easier to actually use that to show where the differences are occurring. So having set all of that up, you can now come back onto the bottom layer, which is going to darken. You can pick a brush at a low percentage opacity. Make sure you've got the white brush to reveal that adjustment, and then we'll zoom in, Control 1 to zoom into 100%. I usually edit at 100%, but if you're going to just put it on social media, there's absolutely no reason why you should ever highlight, edit at that level. So what you can then do is, remember this layer here, if we click on that adjustment layer, that's darkening. So back onto the mask. So if there's bits here that I want to darken, then you can just paint on those. So small brush, and I've still got those wrong brush properties. Hang on, need to. That one's okay. Why is so back onto that mask. and this is going to make bits darker. So this area here, if you wanted to tone that down, personally I prefer it without that. So let's go back to that adjustment. So here you can see, oops, and the opacity's, because I've reset it, it's gone up to 100%. So that was a bit heavy-handed, so undo it.
I should have jumped in there. Gary offered some assistance and mentioned that, but I didn't see it quickly enough. Sorry. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, you have to watch for the opacity jumping up, because you have to use this at a low opacity. So let's make sure that we get rid of all of that. I'm going to put it up to 100%. I'm going to go back to black, and then just make sure there that's removed any of those marks that I did. Go back to, and I usually do this at two or three, no more than that. So we go back to the white, make it a bit smaller, and you do this at a really low level. And you know, for something like if you've got a big spot or something, you might want to use this layer here to darken the highlighted edge, and you might want to toggle on to the other side there just to paint on the side that you want to lighten. And you can toggle between those two layers. So let's go over, let's look at this here where you've got a crease. You mean what? Go on to the lighten, and I can just toggle over there and just lighten that. And it is slow and painstaking painting, and it doesn't look like, you know, you're doing very much. But you work your way around the image, picking the bits that are darker than the 50% that you don't want, you want to lighten, and you just paint over them, and you just keep painting over it until you're happy that it looks like it's about the same sort of tone as all of those areas around it. And you can be very precise about it. I'm just doing it roughly here and quite quickly, but you can you get the idea. You go around those, and you have to make a decision. Do you want to lighten a piece, or do you want to darken the bit adjacent to it? If there's a contrast difference between the two, and what we're looking to do is remove that contrast difference between highlights and the shadow areas, or the darker bits. And what makes the skin look as if it's got sort of blemishes in it is that contrast between light and dark. So you can go round and you can paint all of these little bits, and it's usually best if you keep moving around, because if you get too fixated on one little bit of the area and for too long, you lose track of whether you've actually darkened the whole image, or whether you've darkened just the light bits, or you've lightened the whole image rather than just the bits that were too dark. So, you know, I've worked my way around a few areas there, and probably most of you will think, well, hasn't actually done anything. Well, if I turn that layer off, you can't really see very much. Let's turn that. There, you can see a bit on that one. So it is quite subtle, and it builds up. I'm going to do it a little bit higher adjustment there, so just to speed it up. So
Mike, Laura's asked a question. Laura,
yeah.
Would you like to switch your mic on and ask that one directly, because you may be able to pose it better than I can at this point?
Yeah, I'm just a bit confused of why you're doing the dodge and burning on the original layer rather than a stamp copy of or the layer where you've already done the frequency separation, because you've brought back blemishes that you've.
Oh, I'm just showing this as an alternative approach.
I see.
You wouldn't do this in addition to frequency separation.
Wouldn't you?
Either or, which is why I've gone back to the beginning for this. There are things that you would do iteratively, and you're absolutely right. You know, taking a stamp layer and working on that is useful. if you're convinced that you've got to a point where those bits below it are as you wish them to be. But yeah,
that's made that clear. Yeah, thanks.
yeah. So when I go on to the next one, yes, that is something that you would do on a stamp layer, because that's primarily for contouring, for doing adjustments. This is local here, which is just about removing some of the and minimizing some of these tonal variations. And professional retouchers, if they really need to do a high-end one, they wouldn't just do this on a grey layer. They would actually do this individually on each of the individual colour separations on separate groups for the the different colours in the hue and saturation sort of situation. But I'm not going to do that. That's far too much like hard work. So let's pick all of these. I'm going to group those together so you can see the before and after. So that's the after there. I should have turned that guide layer off. So you can see that's before and that's the after, and it hasn't made a lot of difference. I haven't really made a lot of change to it. So it is quite slow, but it's made a little bit of difference. Let's make it even more of a difference. So you can see there, those were the bits that where I've made the marks to lighten it. And if we go on here, darken, I've really only done that one bit there on the neck. You can see where it is. But if I go on to this one now and darken, so pick up the brush, I'm at 12%, that's quite a large percentage. I'll do it really quickly, and you can see that's building up, removing that light patch quite quickly now, because I'm doing it really quite messily. So that's doing that a little bit easier. And if I go on to the other side and lighten, you can see there it's those darker patches, I'm lightening those. But you would do this at a lot finer detail, really, and control it. And you could do that. I've seen it applied, on insides and outsides of pores where you've got a high-end picture, and they'll sort of, where you've got a strong side light, so you've got a lot of pore detail, they then use this to lighten the shadow side and darken the lit side of the pores, so that the pores appear to almost disappear. So you can then, although you've used harsh light to light the person, you can make it look like it was shot with soft light, and fool the viewer that way. But now you can see I've done this really quite harshly, with a very coarse brush. But now if we turn it off, you can see, get the effect. But because I've done it quite harshly, I've introduced secondary sort of blotchiness now in this area particularly, that wasn't there before. But it is an alternative, but unless you're going to spend an awful lot of time, and I've only done a couple of portraits this way, and it basically takes a full day to do a single image if you want to do it properly using this technique, but it does give you a much greater level of fine control. So I just show you that as an alternative. Okay, happy with that?
Yeah, keep the questions coming as well, guys, if anybody wants to ask anything else. Thank you.
So that was the local dodge and burn, so I'll delete that group. And that was the one that I did earlier on, where you can see there's just a little bit. Well, you can't see it. I've actually turned those layers off in that group, so there we are. You can see that was the one I did earlier on today. slightly better than the one I've just done, but I did take 4 times as long doing that. Okay, so let's turn that off. So the last technique before we break was going to show you the global dodge and burn. So this again starts with the same base level, so the same sort of copy, so that's just the same as this body warp, which is the equivalent there of your stamp layer that you just mentioned. But what you've put on here is a solid grey level layer, and then you've used the dodge and burn tools to paint directly onto that layer. Now the problem I have with painting directly onto that grey level, that layer, is if you make a mistake, you then have to paint over it with the other colour, you know, to restore it or undo or go back through your history. But each time you're making an adjustment to that layer, you're effectively committing that adjustment to your image. So let's show you what that actually does. And this is actually used by people to actually do contouring the same as a makeup artist would do. You know, if you want to accentuate light and shadow, to sort of increase someone's cheek line or whatever, or even you can use it to slim people down as well by controlling where you lighten and where you darken, by putting shadows down somebody. So let's turn that off. And this is the case you might want to put this in addition to the frequency separation area. So I did say here that the frequency separation copy, which here tends to make it a little bit flatter. So let's pick it, was it Laura, picking up on what Laura was saying, I'm going to do a stamp layer. So I've got that as an active layer. Control Alt Shift E. And now I've got a stamp layer, and I'll label it as such, if I can type. Okay, so there's nothing's active above it, so that's now copied the frequency separation and everything else. So I've got my retouching already done. And zoom out, but now, so I'll go back as I said here. We'll put a 50% grey layer on top. Layer, new layer. Pick up the swatch, just check it's still on 50% there. So I'll fill that with that layer with, and you can see I didn't change it to the opacity, so that needs to be 100%. I've just filled it with 6% of 50% grey, whatever that percentage is, 3%. So let's just fill that. There we are. So I've got a 50% grey layer, and I now need to do something because I've hidden my picture. So what I do then is, let's have a look. What do I do? I will change that to soft blend mode. You could try overlay, but I think soft blend works a little bit better. So effectively, anything that's mid-grey has no impact on the image below, and if it's darker than mid-grey, it gets added, and if it's lighter, it detracts. So if I were to just change this to black and white, and I'll show you that. So pick up a brush, and I'm just going to mess here. So change my opacity. You can see that it's gone black on here, and it's darkening those areas that I painted. And if I were to switch it to white, it's lightening it. Okay, so that's me dodge and burn, but the worst sort of worst example. So you want a little bit better control as to where it goes. So what you would do is, on your 50% grey layer, you would come over here and you'd pick up the dodge tool. Make sure you got sensible sized brush with no additional properties, and I might want to look at this and think, well, where do I want the light to fall coming down the neck? And I might want to lighten this area, might want to lighten that. Actually, I might want to lighten the shadows, even that out. But you can use this if you wanted to lighten the cheeks a bit more and across the forehead. You know, you can do that, down the nose, you know, traditional sort of contouring, and you can see it's just making that a little bit lighter. What I forgot to mention is, because it goes to mid-tones, that's where you want it to be, and with an exposure between, well, less than 10 to do that. If we come over here again now and pick the burn tool, make the brush smaller, exposure down to sort of, we can do it about 50% or whatever, mid-tones. So if I wanted to darken the cheeks, if I wanted to darken that under the neck, you can. I wouldn't want to really. So that's, except you can see there, because I didn't undo it straight away, that's burnt into it now. You've got the black bit there, so I can go back and pick the dodge tool, and I can paint over it and bring it back again. But you're messing about, you know, dodging and burning in the same area, and it starts to get a bit messy, which is why I tend not to like it. But so ignore that bit where I deliberately went wrong, just to show you what it does, and you can see it's gone wrong. And because I can't get the level, what I could do is just go back to the layer there, go onto a normal brush, pick up this, make it 50%, so I've got the 50%, and then I could just paint on that layer, and I've picked up the secondary brush. Yeah, it's dual brush has picked up. I've got spaceships, that's why it was going a bit odd. Don't know why that reset there. It shouldn't have done that, because I didn't select that. But anyway, and I can paint 50% grey back on the picture, and I'm back to where I started again. So now, if I switch that to black and white, I go on to the dodge tool, exposure 8%, mid-tones. Hopefully I still haven't got the flying saucers. Yes, they've come back again. Don't know why it keeps on
they're very keen on invading, those, Mike.
Sorry?
They're very keen on invading.
Yeah, they are Space Invaders. Right, so let's see if it'll do it this time without. So I want to increase the light on the cheeks, light on the forehead and down the nose. You know, I can do that a bit on that cheek there. You know, so I can, and maybe a bit on the top of the lip. You can contour that way. You know, what do I want to do with the neck to accentuate it? I might not want to paint any more light on. Maybe just a bit of light here will sort of even out the tones a bit.
Mike, Vicky's just asked a question, actually. I was just thinking about it myself, Vicky, about whether you would do 2 layers, one for dodging and one for burning, or whether you would combine. What would you recommend?
It would make life easier. I mean, yeah, and there's no reason why you wouldn't do it that way. It certainly make it easier to control those independent of each other. This is intended really for coarse adjustments, so you know, does it really matter? Maybe not. Personally, I never use it, which is why I'm hedging with bets in answering that, because it's not something that I normally do. I tend to use frequency separation, but say you wanted to darken down the hair and down that side of the neck and all the way down here, you can, if you really want to, I can change the direction of the lighting and change. And I have done that on occasions. I've used dodge and burn to actually move a light from one side of the set to the other side of the set just by painting highlights and shadows on the opposite side. But you can see here I'm making that really harsh shadow, and I'm darkening that down. I've changed the direction of the light certainly on the neck. I made a complete pig's ear of it. It's quite horrible, but you can see the possibility is there. And if it's too sharp, you could always filter and blur it a little bit just to smooth off the edges. But it's still horrible, which is why I personally never use it. But it is a tool that you can use if you want to contour someone. And if you understand contouring better than I do, and I'm sure the ladies in the audience will be more familiar with the proper application of makeup for contouring than I am. If you're used to layering makeup then or contouring with makeup, you'll certainly have no problem using dodge and burn to do the same effect. So that's your local dodge and burn. The global dodge and burn approach. So that was really it for the frequency separation part of this evening. If you want to, any questions, and then we'll take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I might need 5 minutes. I've got to go and mash my cup of tea, and as a northerner, it needs a good few minutes to mash, Mike. You wouldn't know that being from Bristol,
Oh, I understand that. I know exactly what you mean.
A couple of people sort of asked a while ago, and I didn't want to forget because I'm terrible at this, so I don't mean to forget, and I'm sorry if I have missed anyone's question. But Sue and Carolyn both asked about we can see stamp layer on there, but what is a stamp layer specifically?
A stamp layer is just a copy of everything that is visible on all of the layers that are displaying any content. So it's a snapshot of the current state as you're viewing it. But to make a stamp layer, you have to be on one of the active layers in the stack of pictures. So I couldn't make a stamp layer now because this layer I'm on, layer 1, isn't active. If I make it active, I can then make a stamp layer. And Control, Alt, Shift, hold all of those, press E, and that's now produced that copy, complete with all of those horrible marks on the neck that I got below it. Whereas, so let's delete that. If I were to go back to the frequency separation version, and ignore those layers that are above. So there's my dodge and burn. Here's my global dodge and burn that I've put in. So if I took a stamp layer now, it would reflect everything. If I turn that off and turn that one off, so it's just this layer here. Even as long as I select one of the active layers, it doesn't have to be the top one. Control Alt E, Shift E. But what it does is it puts it above where in the stack where it was. So I'll have to drag it higher up. But it's exactly the same as everything below. So it will copy all the visible layers, but it will place it above the layer that you were sitting on at the time as the active layer.
Thank you.
So it's usually best to go to the top of the stack and then do it.
Yeah. One last question then before we have playtime, if it's all right with you, Mike, is Valerie's just asked that when she does that, she loses the layers below. So how come you don't? Is that the same thing, or is that something else, I suppose?
Sorry, she deletes the layers, did you say?
Now, when she does the stamp, she loses the layers below.
You see, I never merge any of the layers because if I make a mistake, I can't go back. So occasionally I will do a stamp layer, but I usually keep the things below that just in case I decide at a later stage that I want to go back prior to that point and unstamp it, shall we say, and work on the individual layers that are already there. So, file storage isn't really that expensive, relatively speaking. So I don't delete layers, that I've worked on, even if I have a stamp to partway through the process. I'll keep the working copy for two reasons. One is I can go back to do it. Secondly, if after some considerable period of time I want to work out how I did something, having a stamp layer is not going to tell me how I got to that point in the process. Having all the layers below does allow me to understand what I did to get to that point in time. So when it comes to reviewing work or learning or wanting to apply the same techniques again on another image at a later stage, having those still there is a bonus.
Yeah, thank you. So Valerie was saying that hers seems to delete it automatically, so I'm not sure about that one.
Oh, it might do on the later version. I'm using an older version, so that may have been one of the features and enhancements. In which case, I'd be looking to turn it off.
Thank you, thank you. So what should we have? Is 5 or 10 minutes all right with you, Mike? Or what would you prefer?
5 minutes is fine.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay. In that case, we'll meet back together. I'll do my screen share to show people what the new talks coming up are, because I booked about 15 new talks the other day. So
That right.
I'll put all those on the screen. There's loads, plus your charity talk as well, Mike.
Mhm.
Which,
Okay,
I'm looking
cool.
forward to as well. So I will see everybody back here at 25 to 9 then. Thanks very much, everybody.
Cheers.
Oh, and I'll pause the recording as well.
Right. Oh, I've got to remind you to turn it on.
It's a bit late now, Mike, but I have done. Thanks.
Right, back in a minute. Okay, and I'll share my screen.
Second
So-
part, over to you.
Right. Okay, so Photoshop. So thank you for those of you who have hung around. This half I'm going to show you a couple of things to do with brushes, which you may or may not have tried or may not be aware of. But you can make your own brushes that you can use, and you can do all sorts of creative bits and pieces with those. So I'm going to start off by showing you how to take some nice fluffy clouds and turn those into something a little bit more creative that you can mess with. So here's a photo, not a very good photo, of the Tate Modern tower with a couple of clouds on it. So we've got a choice, which one do we want to go with? Let's pick this one here. So what I'll do is pick my lasso tool. I'll reduce the feathering to 5, that'll do. And I'm just going to go round this. So effectively that's the thing that I want to use. So Control C, Control J, and I've now got that on a separate layer. But I'm only really interested in the white fluffiness and not the blue sky. So I can come up here and we can go select color range and see if that works. Sometimes you have to do a bit of trial and error. So there I've selected some of it automatically using the select blue. So let's click on that. And you can see it's selected the whole picture, including that. So I'm not sure what that's going to do. I've just applied a mask there over it, and you can see it's not very good. So let's try a different way. So we'll delete that. I should have made a note earlier on of which was the best one for this. I'm not very good at selecting, so I do my damnedest to try to avoid having to use selections and use blend modes if I can get away with it. The new tools are a lot better. So let's just try the sample color. So, and how much of a range? There we are. Increase the range. That's looking a little bit better. And I'll add another click. That's done a better job this time. Just click round. You don't have to be that accurate really. All I want to do is make sure that I'm isolating a bit of the cloud that I'm looking for. So I'll click OK to accept that. Come down here, and you can see that's still got a bit of the colour in. Doesn't really matter, because to make a brush I'm going to be looking at using a monochrome copy, so we can pick that, and you can see you've got a monochrome copy. It's quite dark in the centre, but it's going lighter in the edges, so I might want to adjust it so there's a bit more detail in the mid areas, mid tones. Something like that. Okay, so this is a case where you would actually merge everything. So layer, flatten image, well, merge visible. So I've now got just that on this layer. And now looking at it, these areas over to the side I might not want, so let's use my eraser. And I rarely, if ever, have a chance to use my eraser, so here's an opportunity. So I'll just rub those bits out. So now take my marquee tool, just drag round that, so I've selected the bit that I want to use, and this is where the fun comes in. So you select your brush tool and you come up here and edit, and you've got define brush preset. So you click on define brush preset, give it a title. I've forgotten how many I've got. Let's call it Cloud 10 because I can't remember how many. And there we have it. So we don't need this anymore, so we'll get rid of that. So that's gone. Actually, we don't need these other. These were some other ones that I could have picked. I'll come back to that later. So let's go and create a new document, Control N. So I've got a new document, and I've now got this brush that I've defined, and if I click once, hey presto, there we are, we've got a blue cloud because I've got blue selected, so we don't want that. Control Z. I've got a dark cloud, quite boring. You can scale it, so I can use the left square bracket to make it smaller, right square bracket to make it bigger, and you think, okay, big deal. Now you can use that to just paint onto something if you want to, but the fun bit comes when you start messing with some of the cloud properties. So I'll go back to on the history and click back to the original there. If you've not clicked on this icon here for the brush panel details, it brings up this secondary menu that gives you the brush properties, and this is where you can have quite a bit of fun. And you've got different things here that you can play with that change the way the brush behaves. So shape dynamics gives you all sorts of things like size jitter, minimum diameter, angle, roundness, and so on, and you can make it flip left and right or up and down, and you can see it gives you a preview of what that's doing. You've got scattering, and you can change the count and the jitter, which is the irregularity of how much it changes. And I'll show you these again on another brush just to make the point. But what you can do is you can pick those up, and there are a few others that I'll use. I'll use the color dynamic in a minute. And the dual brush was the one that was giving me a nightmare earlier on. But you can pick up these sorts of things, and now you can see by one click it's actually giving me up to 5 images. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're different sizes because in the shape dimensions I've said, you know, the angle jitter is the rotation of the clouds, The roundness is how round the clouds are, so they can go flat or quite round, and you can change them, but you can control the minimum. If I'd pushed that all the way down, then some of them would have been long and thin like that. But if you come for round, that you can get lots of them, but they're all the same. And you can see that you can use this for gunshots, exploding and that sort of stuff. When I'm messing around, the best way of working this out is to make sure you've got an empty document, and then just keep clicking on the untitled new document and resetting it, and then you can have a play. And you can see here, you can just fill it up with black, getting bigger and bigger. And if you feel inclined to swap, you can use the X key as you did before and paint some white in over it as well. So you can create your own patterns as you go in along. I find that a little bit random, if I'm completely honest, because we've got a random number of copies of that cloud appearing, and it's not controllable. So we'll keep the scattering there. So the scattering, I'm going to turn the count down to 1, and the jitter doesn't need to be anything. So now, one click, make it black again, one click, and it puts it on there. But you can see it's not placing it where I click, because on the shape dynamics I've got the scatter on. Size jitter changes, minimum diameter, so we can change the size of that. Angle jitter, reduce that, and the scattering, I'm going to reduce the scattering so it should now paint closer to where I want. But if I want to control precisely where I want it, I just take the scatter down to 0. But because I'm only painting one at a time, it now puts it where I want it. But you can see it is rotating each time that I click. And you may want to control that by stopping it by only having it flip left and right, rather than up and down as well. And it depends on the actual shape that you're pasting with. And it looks, you think, well, why do this? The reason you can do this is by messing with these, you can actually define a different brush if you want. So I made an explosion by coming back up here on the count, make the count a bit higher, have a bit of scatter, and you can do this, and you can build up. So now you can build up a sort of explosion as you go, and you can, if it gets too heavy, you can change that. And just same as before, you can always change the opacity of your brush. So I can bring a bit of grey into it as well, and you can. And if you want to make an explosion, you just change your colours. So let's pick some. What we're going to have. We'll have a bit of orange, and we'll have a bit of red, and we can now introduce the color dynamics, and we can change those where it will swap between foreground and background color. So now if I do it, let's start with a new one again. You can see it's actually swapping colours. I've got the purity halfway. If you put that all the way up, think of that as saturation almost. But I could actually use this to produce my own backdrop. And if I want to change the way the colours change, even though I'm using red and orange, the way it's added up and built up has introduced some other colours. because I've got this hue jitter on, which is varying it. If I put that all the way down, there's no real jitter. What we have got is saturation jitter. So some of it is grey and some of it isn't. If I go to the other end of that extreme, there should be less of the grey coming through. You also got the brightness. You can play with all of these, and the best way of working something out is to change it. You can see there, because I've reduced that jitter, which is the variability on the colour, you can see it's building up, because I've got a less than 100% opacity. But there we are, we've got an explosion, and I can swap the colours manually if I wanted to. And you can use this. Okay, this isn't probably the best brush to use for an explosion, but you get the idea. You can, if you pick the right ones with the right sort of shapes, you can use that to build up explosions, fire and all sorts. Best thing to do is to have a play, see what it does, get used to these properties and the variabilities by sliding them around, and you'll see what happens. And I'll give you an example, but you saw how to create the brush, and you can create the brush any shape or size that you want to do that. So let's go back to that. I'm going to pick a different brush now. So that was my cloud, and you'll see I've got a variety of ones here that I've produced previously.
Mike, can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because I think this is a good point to ask it. A couple of people mentioned about changing the, having some difficulty changing the colour of the brush. And Lauren sort of missed that step between how you change the colour of the brush from blue to black.
Oh, I just clicked on the colour swatch over here. So if you click on the little black and white squares that overlap on each other, it resets it to black and white. If you click on those, you can pick whatever colour you want, and then you click on the arrow there to swap them over. So I've got two colours there. Now when I paint, I'm getting blue, and if I click, I can now paint red. So you can toggle between them, but just clicking on there resets it to black and white. So I'm now painting black. And you can change the opacity of those as you go. Personally, I'd leave that on 100%, and I would change it using the colour dynamics of the brush. I'll show you some examples of those. But you can see how you can use it to produce backgrounds and all sorts of things, you know, that you can use for overlays. You can create your own textures from your own images using your own clouds. And as I say, I've got a variety of clouds here where I produced the clouds, and then I've sort of mirrored them and duplicated them, and then I've saved the resultant picture, and I can make that smaller. You can, once you've created something that you like using a cloud and you've multiplied it a few times, you can now save that as a new brush simply by going round that and coming up, edit, and define brush and give it a new name. So you can have a straightforward one, and then you can have multiples. So let's show you another example.
While you're doing that, Mike, I'm just going to ask Eileen if she'd like to switch her mic on and ask that question herself. Eileen, would you mind switching your mic on and asking that question?
Yes. When I'm using brushes and I have a layer, a copied layer, two layers, and I go to use the brush on the image, I can't see the brush doing anything unless I switch the lower layer off. What am I doing wrong?
Not sure. I'm not exactly sure what you're describing. It's not something I recognise. If you want to message me sometime during the day, and I'll have a look at it specifically, and we can see if we can work out what's going wrong for you if you want.
Yes, I get the colour and everything else, and I select the brush if I wanted to do like a sort of a powder outside an image, and I go to the image and I use the brush on it with the colour. It doesn't appear, but if I switch the layer below it off, I can see it. So I don't understand what's happening.
It sounds like it's something to do with either a selection or a blend mode issue, possibly, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'd need to see what it is
Okay.
to be able to
Thank
point
you.
you in the right direction.
Okay.
But I'm happy to try to sort that out for you if you want to give me a bell sometime.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Right. So let's look at other examples. So here we have a leaf that I've cut out previously. So there's the original image. I cut out the leaf, and so I've got just the leaf. I did turn it monochrome because I did read when I first started, it said all brushes should be monochrome. So I turned it monochrome. I then went round, did that, and I've selected it, and then I've gone edit, define brush preset. But I've already got this as a preset, so I'll show you that brush. So if we go back to my brushes and go back to my blank there, so let's see if I can find where I put my brush. Here we are. So there's my brush, and you can see it's quite a big, solid, horrible brush. I can make it smaller, not that small. Okay, so and you can see if I just drag, I get some sort of centipede thing going on. So what can we do with that brush? If we come over to, I keep moving this out of the way. I'll move it over here. That way I'm looking more at the camera. So let's pick the shape dynamics. I'm going to change the shape jitter. I don't want the size. I want them, broadly speaking, around the same sort of size, but we'll have a bit of variability. I don't want them to go sort of thin, so I'll keep the minimum diameter as sort of there. I'll allow it to rotate the angles and do that, and I'll have it flip X and Y, come onto here, bit of scatter to separate them out, and then we'll come back to color dynamics, and I'm going to pick we'll have a pastely green, and we'll come down here. Where's an auto? Let's go a bit lower down, somewhere there, an autumnal sort of colour. There we are. Okay, you can scatter it a bit more if you want to, but you can use that to sort of embellish. If you're into that sort of thing, you can sort of just use that one brush to have your garland of sort of falling flowers, leaves and things like that if you want to. So you can have a play. If you want to make that a little bit more scattered, a bit more random, because that did look a little bit painty, come back to the scattering, push up the scatter. You know, if you're into illustration, I wouldn't do this necessarily for photography, but if you were wanting to make a Christmas card, or not a Christmas card, an autumn card, you know, for someone's birthday, and you wanted leaves going on, you could do this, and you could have hours of fun doing it. So that's just using those brush properties. You don't have to pick something like a leaf to do that. If you wanted to pick up, what should we pick? Let's have a circular brush, and it's gone onto the spaceships for some reason. And dual brush, instead of the spaceships, we'll pick something like that, and we can have size, spacing, and a bit of scatter, not too much scatter.
Mike, Irene's asked as to whether you can add. We've used two colours. Can you add several colours? I mean, what is there a limitation on colours at all? Or
You can pick two, but by having the hue jitter on, it will actually blend those two, and it will change the colour based on it. So, you know, if I've got these two colours here, you can see at hue jitter at 100% it did that, and hue jitter at 0 it's done that. So by increasing the hue jitter, it will, which is the variation, jitter's just another word for the variability, you can change the colours, and you can change the saturation, so some of them will be less saturated. If you change the brightness as well, you know, you can do that. This isn't quite as I was wanting it to do, so I can pick a different one here. So roundness, I can bring that down to, or take that all the way up, and the minimum roundness at 0. It's sort of getting a bit like tinsel, but obviously the wrong colour. But by picking the right combination of brushes, and it's gone back to, there's something about this that isn't working all the time, because it keeps on putting that dual brush back to these spaceships, and I don't want the spaceships. But you can see you can change things around, and it is just a combination of two brushes. So I had one earlier on that's, I was producing marble, so what I had was my cloud that I produced, the new cloud, that cloud, and on the secondary brush I picked up some lightning which I'd produced previously, and I was looking for the tutorial which told me how to create it earlier on, and I couldn't find it, so if I can find it I'll let Mark have it. But what that was doing was, and I need to space it up, but let's pick some different colours. We'll have a red and a sort of blue colour, or purple, something like that, and we'll go back to the shape dynamics. We'll change the size and the angle, and we'll increase the scattering. Go back there.
so quite a lot of this, Mike, is just about playing around with
It is about playing, and it's not doing what it did earlier on today. So, here we are. So, but I should have kept a note of the settings I had earlier on, because what and it's turned off the colour jitter. What I got earlier on, I made a fantastic piece of marble with all the veining going through it, and it's not working at the moment because I've obviously got one of the settings different as I've done it. So it is a case of having a practice and working out which combinations of things work for you, but you can get some funky things going on, and you know, if you find something that you like as an effect and you want to do it, if you keep working on different layers, I'm all just painting this over each other, but if you do it on multiple layers, you can always select an individual layer, and if there's a multiple effect that it's produced that you like, you can save that as a brush preset itself and then create your own set of them. I haven't got the right combination here to make it actually fill in what I was hoping it was going to do. I think I might have the brushes the wrong way round, so because I knew it was these two brushes. So let's go back to that. So there's my lightning, and you can see I haven't got, it hasn't picked up any of that variability, it's just repeating it as I go round. So shape dynamics, now it's sort of going all over the place. You can see that, change the scattering and make that apply. And now, whoa, it's gone a bit crazy. And then if we pick up the dual brush and pick up the cloud for the second brush, so what it does is it applies one brush within the stroke path painted by the other brush. That's what the dual brush is actually doing. So now you can see it's not painting it all over the place because it's constrained by one brush within another. So it is a case of playing with the different options and all of these things. And if we put the color dynamics on there,
Mike, while you're doing that,
Yeah.
Pat asked a question. Pat, I wonder if it's an interesting one. She actually emailed and I thought it was a really interesting question. Pat, would you mind switching your mic on and asking that question?
Yeah, I'd put my video on, but I'm in my pajamas, so.
Okay, thanks.
Anyway, yeah, a question. What's the moral issue with downloading free brushes from websites like Brush Easy? I mean, I personally don't think that it's right because we make our own textures, don't we? So therefore, we make our own brushes. But then I have colleagues who actually say, well, there's no harm in using a downloaded brush from Brush Easy, but there's crazy things on there like moons, and it just morally seems wrong to use a free moon brush to put in an image. So
Yeah,
I'm wondering what the moral issue is on that.
the moral depends on your own moral compass. In competition terms, it depends on the rules. So if you're entering into any competitions, Fiat salons or those sorts of things, or regional competitions for clubs, they say that all the components have to be yours. So you can use the default circular brush, but if you want to have a cloud brush or a leaf brush or lightning, you should have created that brush yourself. In my view, because I don't think if you're using somebody else's brush, you're not adhering to that requirement that all the elements are yours, because the brush itself is a photographic element, or these flying saucers are a graphic element that have been put in there. So you can't really use those, or you certainly shouldn't be using those in your images if you're going to use it in a competition. That's
Yeah,
that's my view on that.
There's the added thing as well, because Photoshop it's just not a round soft brush or a hard brush. There are other types of brushes in Photoshop now, aren't there?
Yeah, and that's where it becomes a bit of a grey area. That's where it does become a little bit difficult. And there is no right or wrong answer to that one. But if you play around with something like this and you produce a pattern which is a derivative of a brush that you've created yourself, then there's no harm in the matter. So here I could turn around and say I want to keep this sort of chaotic string theory thing going as a background. I could just select all of that and keep it and call it chaos, and I've produced it. But that brush has been derived from bits that I've produced, in conjunction with some of the standard ones like the round brush or the ellipse. So it is a grey area, but certainly anything which is a photographic brush, the element that makes up that brush should be yours. So a cloud, a leaf, or whatever, they should be yours. Or birds, if people put birds into pictures, they should be yours.
Oh yeah, that's a very popular one, birds.
Yeah, I mean, I've got thousands of pictures of birds because I cut out the individual ones and use them to make my own brushes.
Yeah, that's what I've actually made a brush out of a Welsh cottage once.
Oh, right, okay.
It was very handy. Okay, so one step further then. So what, okay, this is an extreme example. So you've taken all your photographs, you've made brushes of all sorts of things. You have your blank canvas in front of you, as you have on your screen, and you make something. Does that constitute a photograph for a club competition?
It can do. It depends on whether the judge recognises it as such. But if those brushes are made from photos, then yes, it can be. So another extreme example there would be the Drosty effect, where you have repeating elements within a picture and it goes repeat, repeat, repeat. And that's often used to get these spirals of clocks disappearing into the background. Now, if I were to produce an image there using a clock that I'd photographed and then spiralize it and so on, and then save that as a brush and use it in something else, or save it as a layer and use it in a composite or whatever, and I have done that, then that's fine because it's mine. Now, if you use online actions to produce it, actions are fine because an action is just a mathematical transformation to your image, but brushes aren't. So that's where I would draw the distinction. But if you, I mean, the twirl pictures that were very popular sort of early last year, I describe them as going beyond photography and into graphic art or illustrative art or abstract art. You know, they are valid as works of art in their own right, but there is no essence of the derivative image that they were derived from within it or visible within it, and therefore they cease to be photography in my mind.
Yes,
That's
no,
how I
I
look at it.
quite agree with you on that. I look at those and they make me cringe.
Thanks.
There's no photographer's input whatsoever. It's just press a button, isn't it? But
Well,
no,
no,
thank
I
you very
mean,
much
yeah.
for that. That's help. Thank you. I shall carry on making and using my own.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, yeah, go for it. Carry on. So the other thing I'll show you is let's. And I was looking for it. Here we are. I just drew a single triangle. You can see it there. Oh, and let's pick a colour. Well, actually, what I want to do, I'm going to cancel that. Going to get rid of my background and turn my background off, and then delete that. So I've now got a transparent layer. I'm now going to fill it with white, pick white-ish, and there we are. I've got a brush. You can see if I fill the background actually with a horrible colour, you'll be able to see where it is. So there's my triangle. Oops, I filled the wrong layer. Right, so I've got a solid, what colour do you call that? Salmon, with a white triangle above it, because that's the brush that I drew. And I just drew that brush. And I didn't go back to my brushes. Sorry. So back to my brush, and I've got a bit of variability going on here. Scatter properties already within it. But if I go like that and do a few of those, you can then go up and layer style, bevel and emboss, and put a bit of shadow on it. I've now got shards of glass that are that can be used in an image and can sort of explode. So I could make that a little bit smaller. Let's go back now to an earlier state. So I can apply that layer. So what I could do now is actually I could highlight all of that, turn off the background, and I could use that to make another brush. So you can make brushes based on brushes based on brushes, and it sounds a little bit sort of random as to why you might want to do it, but I've got a few images that illustrate what you can achieve by doing that. So let's kill that one, and we'll kill this. So hopefully people have got the idea of the brushes. I will come back to show you one other thing about the fade, because I haven't shown you about the brush dynamics, but I'll show you a couple of examples. Right, drag that in. So here's one where I've used a layer with those sort of shards of glass, and his gaze is just exploding. So, you know, there's a photographic element in there. There's triangles that I've drawn. You know, it is this very triangle, but I've used some brush dynamics to make the explosion and change the size. And then I've just put a gradient behind that, which has meant that it's gone from light to dark. So there's one example. So let's close that. Here's one where I've done the similar thing with the clouds, and same guy you recognise, and I was just messing around, exploring what can I do. So here he's heavy breathing, extreme heavy breathing. So you know, you can use these creatively. So I'll just open another one, which some of you will recognise from last time, because that was my intro. And you can see here, move this out of the way, you know, I've got a number of different elements going in. So, you know, I've overlaid different brushes on different layers. There's my light fluffy day as I unravel the whole thing. And there's my Houses of Parliament at the bottom. So, you know, I made the explosion and then I went and found the Houses of Parliament to put over underneath it. But you can create thunderstorms of epic proportions. I could add some lightning into that if I wanted to. So where's my lightning bolt? I don't know what this would look like. Ooh. Okay, I might want to move the brush and change it so it's not all the same way. You know, that's looking a little bit naff, really. But with a bit of work, you could, you know, you could actually have the, you know, change the size. There we are. Mix it up a little bit, rotate it and whatever, and you can sort of mess it about a bit if you wanted to. I quite like the idea of setting fire to the Houses of Parliament with a lightning bolt, so we'll leave that. But yeah, you can do that. So there's a few things you can do. So let's go back to the last bit I was going to show you before people get too bored. So we'll go Control New.
Dave's just asked a question actually that would fit quite well here as well, and it links to another question that was asked earlier, I'm sorry, about whether you need to keep a note of any adjustments you like, or do you create a new brush from your work each time. In fact, I may actually ask Dave to ask that one, because he may be able to put that better than I can. Dave, can you put that question yourself to Mike? Is that all right?
Yeah, hi again, Mike. So my thinking was there, in fact, I'd asked the question earlier on, if you get a look that you like when you're making all your different adjustments, there's no way to keep that as a preset that you can then call back up if you want to use it again, or do you just basically need to have a sort of handwritten note of what you've done for that particular look? You were talking about the marble effect earlier on, how you wished you'd kept a note of the
yeah, and I didn't even keep a stamp copy of it when I was just messing around. So yeah, it'll be trial and error for me to do it, and you're absolutely right. If there's something you really like, then save it as a file, just as a snapshot, and you can do that quite easily on your history panel here. You come down here and make a new file, and then you can collapse it if you want and save it as a snapshot as is. or you can go file save as and save it, even as a JPEG if you want. But I would normally keep it as a layer if there's multiple layers in it. But yeah, I would say definitely keep it as you go along, rather than. I'm not a great fan of writing notes of how I did it, the recipe, because I'll forget where those notes are. So I'd much rather keep the product of it with all the steps still there active, that you can go back and look at them, and you can tweak them if you want to, and you can branch off and produce a derivative from it if you want to as well.
So is it a bit like the cloud backdrop you've got with the Westminster? You could actually create almost like a textured backdrop that you could then drop into that image if you like.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I did, as I say, make a really nice marble effect. I did come up with several others which looked like these mottled, painterly backdrops that you get, where with the light spot in the middle and then it's sort of vignetting round it. And I should have kept some of those as well, because I produced some really nice stuff this afternoon and I just didn't keep any of it. Because I was just playing with the brushes, it didn't occur to me until afterwards I realised I'd forgotten how I did it. So yeah, save your work as you go along.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
Now, the other thing I haven't mentioned is pen pressure. Or fade. So the pen pressure I tend not to use. If you're using a mouse, I will usually leave the control off. Let's come back here. We'll pick up a solid brush and make sure there's no other dynamics. There we are. So we've still got some scatter going on in there. That isn't just your ordinary default brush. So where's my normal soft brush that I use? I normally use that one, but see, it's reset it back to those ruddy spaceships. My version here, although it's a legitimate version, does suffer from a few bugs, and you can see that's one of them there, that it's brought it back in. So let's see. Right, we're back to a normal brush. So if you, having got your normal brush, if you come back up here and switch the hardness, we've now got a hard brush. Now we go back to the shape dynamics, and we don't want any of this angle jitter or minimum diameter. And the flip. So what we can do is no size jitter. So there we are. We're back to a vanilla brush, just painting a solid bit. If we come up here to fade, see what happens then? I start clicking and it fades to nothing. Now that's fade at 25%. If I put fade at 100, it fades. I'm not using pressure, I'm doing this with a mouse, but it's tapering off, it's fading away. So you can fade at 100 takes longer to fade than fade at 2, which is faded to nothing. Now if you were to set the minimum diameter, I've now got a balloon on a string, because it's faded from the full size to my minimum size almost immediately, because I'm fading over 2, which is the distance over which that fade occurs. And I can make it bigger. There we are. I've got a brush. I've got a balloon on a brush, with a balloon on a string. Now if I wanted to make it slightly oval, what I can do is I can have the size jitter, and I can make this say 10, I can reduce that size jitter. And you sort of get a, and you probably want to play with these settings to get it right, but you can end up with an sort of a, what shape is a balloon? A balloon-shaped balloon with a string. But that's just messing. The reason I wanted to show you this is if you pick a small brush and you have the fade at 100 and you draw and you make your minimum diameter, 1 or 2 pixels, you can that's gone back to 10, I put it to 100, right. You can now, if you make it smaller, you can draw eyelashes, or you can make hair, and you can change the colour. I'm using a horrible colour, but you can use that fade to make sure that it tapers off and it gives you a nice sharp edge. And if you put the size jitter, that's just making it blotchier. You can see it's a little bit blotchier, so I wouldn't mess with that one. Minimum diameter, if you want to make it a little bit more, you could. So you have to play with these. That's here you can see it's fading over too long a distance. That's just not realistic. So you might need to reduce that. But you can actually paint your own eyelashes. You can paint your own hair, and you can keep changing the colour and just draw lots of bits like that and do those. Now the other thing worth remembering is if you press the R, you can rotate your canvas, because if you're like me, my hand sort of naturally goes in an arc like this. So if I want something to go that way, I might want to do it there, but if I want it to go the opposite way, I might want to turn the canvas round so that when I'm doing it, I'm going in the opposite direction, and then just escape and it goes back to where it was. So rotating the canvas can account for your natural curve when you rotate round your wrist. So did that make sense? Does that help people? You can put textures on, but that's something else. All I would suggest you do is start with a blank canvas, blank document, pick a brush, any brush, pick a brush, and then have a play with these. And it does give you a sort of preview, but there's no substitute really for actually giving it a go and seeing what it looks like. So there, and see what works for you. And here I would take a note of any combinations of brush, these settings that you find particularly pleasing, so that you know how to come back to them again. But certainly the fade is one that I would suggest people have a go with, because you don't need to use the pen pressure, but it will work. See here I've got the minimum diameter, so it hasn't faded off. You want that quite low, and then it will go to a nice tidy point. I'm using a soft brush now, so it's not going to be good. You need, if you're going to do hair, you need to have a hard edge brush. And then you need one that doesn't have these secondary properties that is making it blob. So you just need a bog standard brush. But go and have a play. Right, shall we leave it there?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. That's really interesting. I've never ever looked into brushes at all on Photoshop, so really interesting. Thanks very much. And also thanks very much for for the first half. We seem to have sort of skipped past that, but huge thanks for going through all of this in so much detail, and I think just also being there to answer questions and explain it thoroughly and go back over it and sort of talk people through is what you miss when you're just watching something on YouTube, isn't it? That kind of sort of conversation that you can have. Yeah. Loads and loads and loads of sort of comments on the chat as well. I'm not sure if you want to. Well, you're not going to be able to keep up with them all now. What I'll do is I'll sort of unmute people if they want to sort of come on and say anything before we officially say good night to everybody. But really, really appreciate you coming in tonight, Mike, to do that. Did anybody want to switch their mic on and say anything before we finish, as it were? Stunned silence, Mike. Look at that.
I'll come on and say something, Mark, if you don't mind.
Thanks.
No, I probably everyone's agreeing as well that I thought that was a fantastic presentation. So thank you very much, Mike. It's explained a lot. You think you know quite a lot about Photoshop, and then you get someone like yourself coming on and just making you realise that you don't know anything about Photoshop. So thank you again.
You're welcome. I mean, I don't know very much about Photoshop. It still does an awful lot that I don't understand. Just take some time out and go and play. That's how I've found all of this. It's a case of start with a new screen and then just hit the sliders, hit the buttons, and just explore the hell out of everything. See what it does.
I think one of the things that you showed us actually, and it's maybe explained something that I've went wrong on, because I do quite a lot of portrait photography, and one of the images I put into a local camera club competition was marked down because there seemed to be sort of texture in the shadow areas, and it was because I was using the dodge and burn, and I'm wondering if I had my settings too high for that caused this sort of artifacts almost in the shadow in the light areas. And I think you demonstrated that earlier on.
Yeah, and the other thing to watch with, specifically with portraits, if you're entering them as PDIs into competitions, what I will always do is put a adjustment layer over the top of my finished image, and I will raise the exposure to see if those areas that are intended to be black are actually truly black, because if it gets projected too bright, what you'll find is that those areas you thought were solid blacks aren't, and you've dodged and burned around it, but you've only done the bits where you perceived that it needed to be done, and not the bits that were nearly black but not quite. So you end up with all sorts of horror stories, bits appearing. And conversely, if you're doing a high key image, I would do the opposite to make sure that the areas you want to be pure white are really pure white, because you can't control how bright the image is projected by the judge when they're looking at it.
Thank you. That's a good tip. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of people said they wanted to switch their mic on, so please feel free to switch your mics on and share anything you'd like to share.
Thank you. I enjoyed that thoroughly.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for a great evening. I'd just like to ask, at the beginning, you said that you were self-taught. Can I ask how you achieved your information? Was it a combination of books, videos, YouTube, or how did you gather all the information?
Most of it was just trial and error, but I have been using Photoshop since version 4. I've been using it since 91 or 92, so I've been using it for a long time, and I've upgraded a few times. I'll watch Adobe tutorials on their Adobe TV, less so now because they've obviously moved on to cover the subscription version and the tools that are in that, and I'm still stuck on the antique version. But I will watch YouTube tutorials, so things like turning people into flaming balls of fire, or turning them into ice, or adding snow, or creating lightning, although I couldn't find it today. I will look at those tutorials, and I usually have them on YouTube on one screen, and I'll have an image on Photoshop. And if I've seen a technique that I think might be interesting to try, and I've got in mind an image it could be applied to, I'll open the picture and then I'll try it and see what it does. And it doesn't always work.
Thanks ever so much. Thanks for a great evening, Mike, and thanks for arranging it, Mark.
No. Thanks for everybody for coming. It was a really, really good turnout. It's a lovely crowd. It's a good crowd, Mike. It's a good crowd. Okay. In that case, it is 25 to 10. I said to Mike, I've been sat at this computer since 9 o'clock this morning, so I will bid you all a happy evening, farewell and a happy evening. I'll send usual sort of email out tomorrow when the video is compiled, and I'll pop that up to YouTube on the unlisted link, so you can watch that for a couple of weeks afterwards as well. But huge thanks for coming in today, Mike. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, everybody else, and have a nice evening.
Thank
Bye
you.
then.
Thank you. Bye. See you in a fortnight.
See you later, Sally.